Thanks very much for joining this session on community-led adaptation in Scotland. We're really excited you could join us. I'm Aoife Hutton. I'm a climate change officer with Keep Scotland Beautiful, and I'll be keeping us to time and managing the questions at the end. So today we're really happy to have Irina Zamareva here with us from Adaptation Scotland and Sniffer, and we also have Barney Fryer from the Loch Trust. Thanks very much, Barney, for joining us. So the way things are going to work today, folks, is we'll have Irina do her presentation first, and then we'll have Barney, and then at the end we'll pick up questions for both speakers. So as I said, if you do have questions as we go through, please pop them in the chat. If you could avoid pressing the blue button for now, we'll pick that up at the end. And if anyone wants to verbally ask their questions as well, we'll get you on screen to ask those questions. So I will hand over to Irina just now. I'll stop talking. Irina and Barney, you're the people that we're here to see. So I'll hand over just now. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you so much. Let me just get my slides up. Excellent. Welcome everyone to this community-led adaptation session. And my name is Irina Zamareva. I'm Climate Resilience Coordinator working with Adaptation Scotland. So very briefly, what this presentation is going to look like. First, I will very quickly introduce you to Adaptation Scotland program, cover a little bit about Scotland's changing climate, what that is like, what's happening with it, and then move on to saying a few things about the place-based adaptation in Scotland and how Adaptation Scotland as a program approaching it. And we'll then hear from Barney on more of the climate-ready localities and our new partnership of the climate-ready CAN. So Adaptation Scotland is a program funded by the Scottish Government and delivered by sustainability charity Sniffer. And what we do is enable organizations, businesses, and communities to adapt to the impacts of climate change. So how Scotland's climate is changing. Very briefly, I'm sure a lot of you might be already very familiar with this, but as a recap, two key variables that we will look at: mean temperature and rainfall. So the graph on the left is the mean annual temperature over the past century for the entire Scotland. And we can see that there have been some much warmer years than average and some a bit colder than average by the spikes in the graph. And what we're really after when it comes to climate change is the long-term average. So there's this black and gray line going through the entire graph. And we can see that there is a consistent trend of warming, especially at the moment that it starts going quite rapidly up, which is 1960s and onwards. And on the right, there is a graph illustrating the rainfall pattern, which is also the mean average for Scotland, where we also can see significant increase in rainfall starting from 1960s, which is especially true and relevant for Western Scotland and Northern Scotland. So these are just a couple of changes of climate that we have been observing in the past and also illustrate what kind of climate change we are experiencing today. No matter how much emission reductions we are able to do, which is of course very necessary, very urgent, there is unfortunately already a great deal of climate change locked into the system. And those changes that it will bring about are the ones that we need to A, understand, and B, prepare for and understand how we adapt to those. So now, taking a brief look at the future, what these changes are that we are anticipating in Scotland. Basically, they are a continuation and intensification in some cases of trends that we already are observing, the ones that I have been talking about just before. So these are weather that will remain variable and may become more variable across entire Scotland. Secondly, average temperatures will increase across all seasons. We will also see typical summers becoming warmer and drier, while typical winters becoming milder and wetter. We will also experience intense and heavy rainfall events that will increase both in winter and in summer. The sea levels will be rising. That is, of course, very relevant for entire Scotland with its coastline all around it, and the reduced frost and snowfall being another projected change for Scotland. So these changes that we're talking about are, of course, not an abstract number on a graph or a chart or an abstract weather event. These are very real events with very material, physical, social, psychological consequences. And this graph here is actually from the 15 key consequences of climate change for Scotland that Adaptation Scotland has developed a few years ago, where we try to really process all the information that suggests the different ways the climate will be changing and put them down into something that is easily accessible, visual, and a graphic guide. So I will not be taking you through all 15 of them, but just to mention a few as examples. One of the key consequences is the increased risk of flooding for communities, land, infrastructure. There's also the consequence, of course, for the health of ecosystems, with native ecosystems such as peatlands degrading severely and being in more dangerous place. There's consequences for people's well-being as being directly affected by extreme weather events or connected to more long-term consequences of flooding or heat waves. And the fourth one, the fourth consequences is on infrastructure, connectivity, and interdependencies, where our energy, transport, water, and ICT network support services may be disrupted, as they already are during different severe and extreme weather events. So Adaptation Scotland, in response to these challenges, has developed a theory of change for climate-ready places and communities that is guiding our program and the work in this sphere of responding to climate change. And adaptation, in our vision and this theory of change, is really not just about preventing or preparing for the future. The really in its core is flourishing together in the future climate and creating climate-ready, fair and healthy places and communities. And another important aspect of it is also collaboration, where adaptation isn't something that we see as a centralized top-down kind of thing that needs to happen, but something that is a big collaborative project that needs a lot of organizations, communities, groups on board and working together to create those climate-ready places. So this is on the left-hand side. There's this bit about the communities and community-led adaptation that we'll be focusing in more detail in the next few minutes and across this presentation. So Adaptation Scotland approaches it in different ways, and one being creating the different tools, resources, guidances to support community-led and place-based adaptation, and another working in partnerships. So to focus on the first one, on the tools and resources, here's just some screenshots of the different things that are available on our website. One of them being, for example, Climate Ready Places, which is the illustration in the left corner on the left side, that illustrates how different places in Scotland are looking when they are unadapted to climate change and how they're looking when they are adapting to climate change. And this is broken down to specific characteristical areas for Scotland, such as highlands and lowlands. There's urban and rural and industrial and coastal zones where you can explore and see what adaptation looks like in those places. There's also a guide on community adaptation actions that includes different possible actions that communities can take to adapt. There's also a version of a place standard tool that Adaptation Scotland has been involved in developing together with the Scottish Government and a range of other partners, which provide a holistic framework for understanding the quality of a place and that also how the place is or isn't adapting to climate change. And moving on to the second aspect of approaching place-based adaptation, collaborations. This is just something that I wanted to share, the different collaborative projects that Adaptation Scotland has either instigated or is currently supported or being involved in various capacities. So it's not a comprehensive tracker of this map, but more just initiatives that are currently in motion. So you can see a range of different things happening in northern, eastern, western Scotland. There is Highland Adapts, where a business case has been developed together with the Highland Council. And there are a lot of resources and organizations coming together to start the Highland Adapts project in 2021. There's Aberdeen Adapts, where adaptation strategy has been approved by Aberdeen City Council. We are also supporting Outer Hebrides Community Planning Partnership in the Outer Hebrides to help them understand how climate change is impacting their areas and their places and figuring out ways to respond. There's a number of others too, just to maybe briefly jump to Climate Ready Clyde, which is kind of an ongoing, long-standing collaboration between different public and private sector organizations in Glasgow City region. And just a couple of weeks ago, we launched the first Glasgow City region climate adaptation strategy that is currently out for consultation in its draft form. So zooming in from more regional level projects, this is where localities and the focus on localities and climate ready concept being practiced at the locality scale comes in. Earlier this year, during July, I think, Adaptation Scotland has launched an open call looking to support communities and organizations working on climate change at the locality scale. And the key aim for us here was really to find locality-based partners that would like to work on increasing climate resilience and climate readiness in locality. And also a few other important sides of what we're looking for here were creating synergies of adaptation and other agendas and priorities of the area to ensure projects' impact is a long-lasting one, as well as generating learning and resources for different kind of communities across Scotland where the learning from these localities might be transferable. So we selected 2 localities to work with, one of them being Loch, on behalf of whom Barney is going to speak to you in a second. The second locality was Mar in Aberdeenshire, and with them we'll be starting to kind of work in more depth in the next year. But just to say briefly on our Climate Ready Can partnership with Loch, it's a very, very new one. We just started working together in September, and we, from our side, are very excited about it for, well, many reasons, but one of the key ones being that there was so much appetite for real change in the area, and that there were a number of partners already involved in figuring how to make this whole process of future making that is not necessarily just adaptation focused, but much more broadly on future making in the area. We had a lot also to build on here because Adaptation Scotland some years ago was involved in the Climate Ready Biosphere that developed a vision and an action plan for Climate Ready Biosphere, of which Loch is part of. But not to steal thunder from Barney, I will let him say a bit more on the Loch side of things. Over to you, Barney.
Brilliant. Thanks, Arena. Right, let's see if we can get the technology right. Fingers crossed. There we go. So, hi, I'm Barney. I moved up to Scotland in October last year. So I've had the interesting experience of spending most of my first year in employment in lockdown. But I moved up from West Yorkshire, and I'll touch on some of my experiences there in a minute because we have also experienced some of this. Reflecting on some of the issues that have been raised throughout the day, I'm going to be touching on hopefully some issues of justice, certainly reflecting on the morning session around storytelling. So I am actually going to tell you a little bit of a story about Loch. First off, I thought I should explain where Loch is. So if I manage the technology right, there we go. So Loch is actually the largest freshwater body in southern Scotland. but you would be forgiven for not knowing that or where it is, because many of the people in that area still are not entirely sure. It's a place that has been somewhat underrepresented in marketing terms. But we have Castle Douglas and New Galloway are the largest towns. Neither of them is massive at either end of the loch. To put that into perspective, that you're seeing there is an image of the Galloway and Southern Ayrshire biosphere, which is based around 7 river catchments. So Loch Ken is on the Kendee river catchment, one of those 7. And Irina's already mentioned that Adaptation Scotland did some great work 6 years ago with the biosphere about what that vision and action plan looks like at the macro scale, at the area scale. And just in case anyone's not sure where Southwest Scotland is, that gives us a context there in terms of the nearest large cities to us. And I certainly don't want to underplay the importance of the big regional strategies and priorities and action plans. But this is trying to draw this down to a very real personal level. And when the floodwaters are rising, you don't reach for the regional action plan. So a little bit more about Loch Ken. Quite a lot of the time, it looks like this. I feel very lucky to be able to view this as my office. Loch Ken is an amazing place, which is very popular with the growing trend for wild swimming, outdoor athletics. So quite a lot of the time, it looks like this. And here we're looking at one of the marinas on the loch at a place called Crossmichael, a little village on the east side of the loch. This is actually from January this year, where we had a group of wild swimmers from Bolton in England travel up on Burns night to go swimming in the loch in January. That's not the important bit about this picture, though. What I'd like to observe is that hut on the right-hand side of the picture, that hut that is significantly larger than an individual, because sometimes Loch Ken looks like this. Now, that is that same hut almost entirely underwater. Crossmichael has a long history of experiencing these floods, so much so that they've actually got marker stone to indicate the great floods. And hopefully you can see the trend there, that 1815 to 1872, and then significantly higher, 2015. So we have the issue of floods. And that's very much something that I experienced from my living in the Calder Valley in West Yorkshire. And I will touch upon some of those experiences because there's a lot of synergy between them. But then in April this year, we had a wildfire. So in our area, we have the Galloway Forest Park. We have a lot of trees. We have a lot of moorland as well. And we had a wildfire raging. So you can see, obviously, in the emergency response to fighting the fire, we had professionals coming out. You can just make out 1 or 2 of the firefighters there. And it was an ongoing thing. It was on for days. And we had the professionals doing their job. But what we also had was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of anxiety. And some really interesting stories emerged from that. Because what the average normal person was struggling with was, well, what do I do? What can I do? So very much this is about trying, for Climate Ready Ken for us as a project, is about trying to translate this down to the very personal, that how can I be prepared? And if emergencies happen, how can I take action? And then I'll touch a little bit about on opportunities, because it's not all bad. And any unrelentingly negative messaging, looking back to what we heard at the morning of the event today, psychologically leaves people cold. People don't respond to universally negative messaging. So I'll just take a little bit of time to talk about how we can respond to some of the risks, and then I'll look a little bit about the opportunities. So Irina's touched upon some of the likely impacts of this. And the thing is, we are going to face these. If you're not already facing them, then the communities you live in will be facing them soon. And there's a variety of responses, and some of them are very much disaster emergency management responses. Some can be done before the event, and some very much during and after the event. So that first image there is from a project called Slow the Flow. which is in the Calder Valley in West Yorkshire, where I moved from. So you're talking about towns like Hebden Bridge, Mythenroyd, Todmorden. It's a steep-sided valley that has suffered a number of flooding events in recent years. So what this project is doing is trying to do natural flow management solutions, permeable dikes, and anything to just slow down a bit of the runoff. There's a very important principle here in that if we try to fight nature head on, we're going to lose. Resisting the impacts of these extreme events is exponentially harder the more severe they get, and is always doomed to fail. It's about managing the event as best you can and then recovering as quickly and easily as you can. But this is something, if you have got time, you know this is an area that suffers flooding, then it's definitely worth looking at what proactive steps you can take to slow the water down. Interestingly, in the Calder Valley, we have flood sirens, very much like air raid sirens. They sound exactly the same. And although in this modern age we've got all kinds of apps and phone alerts and technology that can tell us things, there is no substitute for hearing an air raid siren go off in your community, and it tells everybody that there is trouble on the way, and it buys vital time to prepare. There's an interesting psychological aspect to it. Having grown up seeing imagery around the war and air raid sirens, there's a very interesting psychological response to hearing that go off in the 21st century. But it is a great way to alert an entire community that trouble's coming. It also gives you time to look at your own individual measures. So putting flood barriers, flood boards in front of doorways, making sure that your cellar, your basement water pump is on, is ready, is working. These are all really important steps to manage the impact during the event. However, one of the most important tools you have at your disposal is a telephone. And I'll tell a little story now about the wildfires. So the wildfires that hit us in April, the community that was closest to the front line of the fire was a small village called Mossdale. And they suffered not directly from the fire, but from a lack of information. They came under the community council of the town of New Galloway. And yet, somewhere in the emergency response, the people in New Galloway forgot to communicate with the people in Mossdale. So the people in Mossdale closest to the fire front were finding out what was going on from the BBC website. This in turn has created certain issues around certain elements of bad feeling between the two villages, or the village and the town. But it remains a really powerful tool when it comes to protecting your communities and disaster response. Knowing that we need to check on Doris at number 3, when somebody needs to ring it, and making sure someone has a list of that. Now, this is not a new idea. We've had neighbourhood watch, we've had farm watch, we've had shop watch. Call round lists are dead basic, dead straightforward, but really vitally important. If we have to evacuate, whose car is Doris going in? And do they know that they've got to wait until they've got Doris in before they set off? Really practical things about how you manage the event. I should also say that after the event, there is obviously the cleanup costs, and things like, if you know you're going to face flooding events or likely to face flooding events, do you have cleanup materials available? And where do you store them? Because you don't want to store your cleanup materials in a building that's going to get flooded that you can't access. So where are the materials? Can we get them? How do we get them to the people that needs them? I have noticed in the chat 1 or 2 people coming in from housing organisations. There's also an element of how we design and build houses. In some communities, ground floor carpets are likely to become a thing of the past, because when you've ripped up the carpet for the 5th time and thrown it away, you might decide that it's much better to tile or other hard surface your ground floor. And this is something we've seen, again, the community I moved from. We had buildings, pubs and the like that were very badly hit, and that have gone to flagstones, to tiles, to a surface that allows them to clear up, recover, and get trading again as quickly, cheaply, and easily as possible. So it's not just about the cleanup, it's about what are you cleaning and how easy is it to clean. But then I really did want to stress a little bit about opportunities, because it's not all bad. We're very much a rural agricultural area, so a strong farming community. And I put up there a picture of one of the UK's largest vineyards, which is not me saying that in southwest Scotland we're about to start growing grapes. But I use that to illustrate that what we have grown before, the livestock we have raised before, we might not be doing the same in the future. There will be opportunities for new crops to be grown, new livestock to be reared. This leads us into the question of yields. So again, a warming climate should increase some of our yields. However, there are risks around that if we lose the Gulf Stream, that could massively impact negatively. But there are opportunities, and again, it's about balancing that you're not always talking doom and gloom to people. You're saying there are positives to come out of this. We have a Loch that has a very active adventure sports community. So warmer climate means we will have a longer season. We will have more times when the temperature of the water is more bearable for more people, notwithstanding that some people go swimming in January. So that will benefit our tourism businesses based around the sports and activities on the water. In a warming climate, we should spend less on our heating bills. That's a generic thing that should benefit everyone. And if we are going to put in physical measures to reduce the impact of extreme weather events, somebody needs to install them. So again, there's opportunities hopefully for local businesses to get involved in the installation of these bits of equipment. I should point out that preparing for disaster management in the way I was talking to before does create opportunities for softer benefits in terms of breaking down barriers within communities, people getting to know each other. And then I thought I would finish here with this image, which is not actually from our community. It's from a community in Cumbria who, again, also have experienced some very devastating flood events. But it touches on many of the points that we're hoping to explore through the Climate Ready Ken project. The bit that really resonates with me more than anything is at the bottom right, where it says, what do you say to somebody whose life is in a skip? And this is something I've personally experienced cleaning up in Todmorden, where we are taking people's entire life possessions from some of the least wealthy areas of the town and throwing them away, knowing that these people do not have the money to replace this. They do not have insurance. They couldn't get it. And even if they could get it, they couldn't afford it. There's some deeply psychological issues to manage there as well. So it's not just the practical physical cleaning up or managing the event. It's understanding the impact of that on the people. It's all about people. And that, again, plays very much to the justice discussion that we had just previously, that the people who suffer most are often in the poorest quality housing and have the least resources. So at that point, I will stop my share.
Do you want to just continue, Barney?
Oh, no, I've got the slide.
The last slide.
I did this last time as well. So I am going to hand back to Irina just to talk a little bit about some of our practical next steps with the Climate Ready Ken project.
Thank you. So this is really just to continue on what Barney was saying about putting really people and ways that decision making is done at the heart of this. So what's next to a Climate Ready Ken is a few different strands of work. Engagement with the decision makers being very, very central to it, where we are trying to identify the people in the area that we need to engage kind of firsthand before going out and doing wider community engagement. So in our case, this was the elected members, the councillors that we are actually having a meeting with next week to bring them on board, to allow them to contribute to this project that is at the very early stage. And to start building the network of kind of project allies, hopefully. Another important bit is the community engagement, so the wider one in Loch that will be happening in the start of the 2021. And those two strands will hopefully then bring us to actually the co-design of locality adaptation actions that vary not only that are not only about, as Barney was saying, the specific physical things or fixes that need to be made, which are important and will be happening, but also about ways of how local networks function, how the different governance mechanism function, how what is happening in the Loch feeds into the regional Dumfries and Galloway plans and processes. So here, yeah, that is really kind of the key three aspects of how we are going to be approaching this as the next steps. And just to conclude here, this is the image from one of the earlier Adaptation Scotland projects that says reimagine your street here, and that we would like to use adaptation as a call to reimagine the way that we engage with each other and ecosystems and environments that we all inhabit in more just and fair and inclusive ways. So thank you very much, and please get in touch if you have any questions, thoughts, comments, queries on adaptation, possible collaborations. There's the email on the screen, adaptationscotland@sniffer.org.uk. There's also my email and Barney's email floating in the chat, and we're here for another little while for questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anna, and Barney. That was great to have those different levels of insight as well, both at the community level, but also wider and what's going across Scotland. So that was really, really interesting. We've got a few minutes left, folks. So if anyone does have some questions to put to Irina or Barney, pop them in the chat and we'll invite you to come on screen, or I can read out your question. Up to you. So do pop it in the chat. While we're waiting for a few questions to come through, I've got a question for you both, if you don't mind. And it's just around how we communicate with people around adaptation, because I think at times there can be that nearly at loggerheads, adaptation and mitigation sometimes are perceived to clash. But how do we communicate to folks the importance of having both of these approaches nearly hand in hand?
Yeah, I think that's, maybe I can start, Barney, and say a few things, because that is a very live question for us across all of the different projects, because that is something that is so context and people sensitive and specific, of course, and we want to be using the right language with the different groups of people that we're using. And we would find that sometimes calling the process of adaptation per se is not necessarily helpful, because there's something very profound about living with the environment in a way that is good for everyone involved. That doesn't necessarily need that kind of lens of like mitigation, adaptation, and especially in Scotland, we're drawing on this long tradition of and ideas around stewardship of the land. So it's, I think, yeah, very much about like plugging in this kind of what may sound as this very kind of technical sciencey terms into the everyday realities of people, plus that adaptation that is something that we've constantly as humans have done throughout centuries. It's just something that we need to be paying kind of a bit more attention to the changes that are happening and doing that at a bit of a faster pace.
Yeah, I mean, I endorse that. Maybe in slightly blunter language, I say, how do I talk to people about adaptation? I don't, because no normal person uses the word adaptation. I talk to people about change. Which is an interesting one, because talk to people about change is about doing things differently, which is all adaptation means in fancy language. And I think this plays very much to the justice points that were being raised earlier, that if we use impenetrable degree level educated language when we talk to normal people, it is elitist. It's not how they talk. It's not how they talk to each other. It's not how any normal person talks to each other. Change is an interesting one. I've taken to approaching communities and when I'm speaking to people, asking people to put their hand up if they think the world is perfect. And I've yet to have anybody seriously say yes to that. So if people accept the world isn't perfect, they also accept there are things they would change. So then the conversation is about which change, but you've accepted that change is desirable. So I think that's really important. again, people are seeing differences. They are seeing things being different. If you talk about lived experience, I remember as a child the occasional extreme weather event, but it is multiple in a year now. And that's just in my own living memory. And I talk to people of an older generation who can talk much more powerfully about that. So it is happening. It's making people realize that what they're seeing day to day is happening and that we have to do something different.
Great, thanks, Barney. Yeah, and I think some of those points were picked up on by the talk from George Marshall this morning around the language that we use to communicate about these things and steering away from that technical, maybe overly scientific language. Thanks for that. We've got another question in the chat. I think we've got time for one more. So this is from Verena. Where can we find more examples of adaptation community projects in the UK and learn more about this field? And what is the Scottish Government doing to support communities in climate change adaptation?
So I can probably pick up a bit about the examples there. First of all, I'm also sure that Keep Scotland Beautiful has a wealth of different examples how, the Climate Challenge Fund itself, of what things have been happening. There's also from the Adaptation Scotland side, there is on our website, we have a case study section where we are documenting all the collaboration projects that are happening. I don't think we have a map, so you won't be able to see them kind of on the map-based way, but kind of you can definitely filter them by different categories and see who's doing what in which fields. And the third example would be the Scottish Communities Climate Action Network, known as SCAN, and they do have a map and support a great range of different climate change and adaptation projects across Scotland.
I would say, from my perspective as a community, one of the things the Scottish Government is doing is funding Sniffer to run the Adaptation Scotland programme. So for us as a community, knowing we wanted to address this, being able to reach out, work with Irina and her colleagues is really powerful. It helps us connect with other communities that are doing things. And I would say the Scottish Government is doing a lot more than the Westminster Government, speaking as someone who's just moved up from a community very badly affected. I wonder if I could just very briefly touch on a couple of comments that have come through. I see, Graham, you're making some comments about authorities going to solve your flooding problem. Good luck with that. We in Todmorden had about £1.5 million spent by the Environment Agency building bigger walls. First serious flooding event, it overtopped them. If you've ever, I know I think you're from Hawick, and there's been some very dramatic footage recently of events in Hawick. Again, watching manhole covers explode up with the force of water, because sometimes it's not run-of-river flooding, sometimes it's sewer flooding. It comes up through your toilet, through the cellar of your property. These are things that bigger walls will not fix. And then I've also experienced the situation that Irina touched on about connectivity and train cancellations. I used to work in Manchester, and suddenly I had no way to get home. And I had nowhere to sleep. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? These are real personal lived experiences. And I would use the thing of caring for the people you love is a really powerful motivator. And preparing for these events is about caring for yourself and the people you love.
Great. Thanks for that, Barney. That is us. Just out of time just now, folks, but thanks very much again, Irina and Barney, for coming along today.